All right. So the conclusion is at the end, right? So to significantly improve the soil structure, farmers will need to abandon the use of chemical fertilizers. Why does this person think that they need to abandon them?
Because for whatever reason, the use of chemical fertilizers has resulted in an abandonment of the green manure crops.
Okay, so they started using the chemical fertilizers that that led them to stop growing the green manure crop, right, such as alfalfa, and now the soil structure is bad, so if we want to improve it, what would you like to say in the conclusion? So in order to improve the soil structure, we need to do what? Start growing the green manure crops again, right? But instead they're like, so we need to abandon the use of chemical fertilizers. Okay. What do they think about the use of chemical fertilizers? Yes.
Well, I mean, I think the assumption is that if you're not using chemical fertilizers, you'll go back to the green crops.
Not exactly. It's not that if you'll abandon it, you'll go back, because they're saying that we need to abandon the use of chemical fertilizers. I think it's the other way around. It's that if you don't abandon, what happens?
Your soil dries up or goes down.
You won't use the green manure crops. Because the problem here is that the soil is bad, right?
Right.
And we need the people to go back to using the green manure crops.
Mm-hmm.
But this, instead of saying that directly, they're saying, therefore we need to abandon the use of chemical fertilizers. So they must be thinking that if they don't abandon, if they don't stop the chemical fertilizers, then they won't use the green crops. Right? I think the key word here is the word need in the conclusion. So we need to abandon the use of chemical fertilizers. In other words, if we don't do that, then we're never going to go back to the green. Whereas I think what you said was, if we abandon, oh shoot.
If we abandon, we'll go back to...
If we keep using the chemical fertilizers, then we won't use the green ones. And you're saying, if we abandon, if we stop using the chemical fertilizers, then we will go back to the green.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a slightly different conclusion. That would be like, therefore, not that they need to, but like they should abandon. Like, or if they do abandon it, then they will. This is just saying it's necessary. So they must be thinking that the chemical fertilizers is somehow getting in the way of using the green alfalfa crops.
Right. And additionally, just a quick question about the word choice they use in A. Like they say grow alfalfa, and E says use was it green manure crops? Is that like specificity?
That is one problem, because we don't have to go back to alfalfa, right? We only have to go back to a green manure crop such as alfalfa, but we could go back to another one. There's a bigger problem in A though, and A is actually flipped. It's saying most of the farmers in the region who abandon the use of chemical fertilizers will periodically grow alfalfa. That's kind of what you were saying. Like, answer choice A is almost like, it's like it's not quite a sufficient assumption, but it kind of feels like a sufficient assumption, where what we need to assume is that if we don't abandon it, then we'll have a problem. Not that if we do abandon it, we'll be successful. And that's the difference between A and E. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can we stretch this one out a little bit more?
Sure.
I probably gave too much credence to the phrase most, if not all. And can you just talk me through why we assume that because the farmer's in a certain region equates to most, if not all?
Well, so the question for this is a necessary assumption question.
Okay.
Because it's saying the argument relies on this assumption. And so we're looking at these answers and we're saying, does the argument absolutely have to assume this? Does it have to assume that most of the farmers, we'll just ignore the if not all, because that's just like, that's always true when you say most. Most just means more than half, so it could be all.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just stick with the most. Do we have to assume that most farmers in the region who don't use chemical fertilizers anymore will periodically grow alfalfa? That
I'm sorry, I meant E. I said most, but I meant many. So I know that's E.
okay. So in E,
Many, if not all. Sorry.
okay, so E, do we have to assume that many of the farmers in the region, which just means some of the farmers in the region, will not grow green manure crops unless they abandon the use of chemical fertilizers? We have to assume that
Got it.
because if that's not true, then that actually means that if they what was it? If many will not grow green manure crops means that all of them will grow green manure crops. In other words, if you negate that, you're saying that, oh no, actually, even if they don't abandon the use of chemical fertilizers, they'll still end up growing green manure crops, which would undermine the conclusion because then we'd no longer need to get rid of the chemical fertilizers.
I understand that. I just, it was the many, if not all, like together. Just
Yeah, I
not
think it's like kind of like
So
thrown
you're
in
saying
there.
I should ignore it?
Ignore the if not all because many just means that the same as some, which is at least one, which is anywhere from 1 to 100. Any other questions on this one? It's a tough one. Okay.